Welcome to this week's edition of the Commercial Real Estate 101 podcast. It's great to see you all this fine afternoon. Today we have a phenomenal guest, Cory Zelnik. And I remember when I first reached out to you on LinkedIn, I accidentally spelled your name wrong, so I apologize for that. I've been following you for a while. I operate in the retail space here in Louisville, and I know you've been active in New York City for many, many years. And so I've always been kind of interested in having a conversation with you because it seems like you know a ton of stuff about retail real estate. And today's podcast, we were going to focus in on retail leasing specifically. So I'm really excited to have a conversation. So Cory, thanks again for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Raphael. I appreciate it. I was looking forward to it. You know, I pick on people when they spell my name wrong, but I found out a little while ago that it's in Apple. Apple has the autocorrect as Corey. So I don't beat people up too much.
Yeah, let's go with that. Okay. All right. Well, Cory, to start off, what we typically like to do is learn a little bit more about the person that we're having a conversation with. So if you don't mind kind of sharing your backstory, I think that'd be awesome.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure. I am a born and raised New York City boy. First 10 years of my life in Queens, New York. It's an outer borough of the city. And then I've been in Manhattan ever since, which is now over 50 years. I graduated from the University of Maryland in College Park after 1 year at a Division III school in upstate New York to play basketball, and realized that, sort of 6 feet and 6 feet nothing and Division III basketball, I wasn't going to the pros. So I went to the University of Maryland in College Park and had a blast, had a true college experience and got to play a lot of sports down there. So I was very happy with that. Got into the real estate business, the retail real estate business, quite frankly, by accident. Came out of school. I said, I'm going to go to Wall Street. With no business degree, no anything. I had a liberal arts degree from the University of Maryland. I like to say I graduated in the school of getting out of school. I'm not a straight A student, wasn't a big fan of the intellectual world. I'm purely a streets guy. And of course I was wrong about Wall Street. And I never blamed my parents for lack of guidance or anything like that. These were choices that I made. And it was a quick reality check. And then shortly thereafter, a friend of mine was working at a real estate company here in New York City that specialized only in retail leasing. They were the only firm at the time doing that. He was in their Long Island office. He said, hey, they're looking for somebody for New York City to come in and to be a listings agent, basically. They didn't call us canvassers back then. And so I got, it was like the second week of June, I believe. It was probably a 20-minute interview. 15 minutes of it was about where I went to college, because the person I was interviewing with also went to the University of Maryland. And then I got the job, and he said, I'll see you the Tuesday after Labor Day. Go have a nice summer. And when you start, you will make $250 a week to walk the streets of New York City. And the fun part of that, looking back, is that I still do that today with my newbies. That's this business. That's the retail business. I know we'll dive into it, but it's literally on the street. You're out, you have a little bit more suburban in you, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But, we're not about getting into cars and going from strip center to strip center. We're literally about walking every street. And so I did that, for a hot minute, went and got my license. I would say also blaming nobody for lack of guidance, but did some bouncing around in the business for a few years. Was fortunate, made some money. But was unfortunately not well advised as to my Uncle Sam, who I had to pay some taxes to after I made some money. So I learned some lessons. And I stepped away from the brokerage business for a brief time, about 3 years, and worked in-house for a little drugstore chain called CVS Pharmacy. At the time they were small. They only had 1,100 stores. Okay. But they had 0 stores in the New York City metropolitan area. And they were out looking for a real estate director for the New York City market. I was able to get that job. And then for 3 years, I went through about a 6-month training period, identified locations. Some of them were ground up development. Some of them were expensive locations for them here in the New York market, which they had anticipated. They said, let's just see how these stores do, because they're like turning a battleship. They weren't going to come in and do 50 stores. I was on pause, and then I got recruited. I literally was on pause. I had nothing to do. I got recruited by a gentleman here at a small firm, Winnick Realty Group, and Jeff Winnick recruited me. basically to be his partner. He was working with a small mom and pop drugstore chain called Duane Reade at the time. They had 39 stores and they were getting ready to go public, and the timing was right. And he and I became fast partners. And over the next 9 years, did about over 200 Duane Reade drugstores throughout our markets. And then after 10 years with Jeff, as the documents say, we had philosophical differences. And I moved on, and as of this coming August, my firm, Zelnik and Company, will be 19 years old.
Wow.
Yep. And so we continue to do landlord rep, tenant rep. I'm a relationship driven guy. Panda Express, I represent for over 18 years. I represent one of the largest independent landlords here in the city for about 24 years now. So that's how I drive my business. We've built up to the point where currently there are 7 brokers plus me and 1 marketing person putting all of our stuff together, social media and the like. Mm-hmm. And, we just do it. I love the retail business. I love that every day is a new experience. I love that I wake up unemployed every single day, and you just go out there and you get it and you get it done. And some of the stuff, whether it's our leasing and marketing, whether it's our social media, I like to tell these guys sometimes, not everybody needs to know how the sausage is made, but we put out good product, and I believe we do good work. So that's my fastest bumper sticker I can possibly do for you.
No, I appreciate that, and it kind of it goes to show like so for a lot of people we've talked to many people that have entered in the commercial real estate business from when they started or maybe pivoted into a different career. Oftentimes we realize that, for example, in your case with retail, it was kind of by accident. You didn't really know much about retail before, and you kind of just fell into it. That was kind of how I was. The brokerage that I ultimately joined in my previous career, I was in engineering and software development, and then I got into brokerage. And, it just so happened the brokerage I joined did a lot of retail. So I figured I ended up kind of falling into it. And now that's kind of what I do on the local level. So, kind of interesting. What I wanted to kind of do as well, as far as the conversation is concerned, is kind of highlight various different parts of the retail leasing piece, because you mentioned the Panda Expresses, you mentioned several other retail tenants that you represent, but you also do landlord rep as well. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of unpacking some of those, because a lot of the people that listen to this podcast, they're in the commercial real estate space. A lot of them are brokers. We have investors. We have commercial real estate professionals as well. So providing a little bit of color in these different avenues, I think, could be beneficial. And so to start, regarding, establishing relationships with tenants, because I think the tenant is kind of what drives the ship oftentimes, right? Because, if you have to understand what tenants are looking for in order to properly represent your landlord clients as well. So to start off, when you're trying to seek out a tenant or working with tenants, like, what's that thought process about how to evaluate their long-term viability? Are you typically only focused on nationals, or are you also kind of working with some local operators where they have multiple locations, et cetera?
Well, on a personal level, I'm working towards the larger companies, whether they're national, strong, regional. Mm-hmm. I would say, some might argue that my one local tenant is a small place called Lenwich that has been in business in New York City for 35 years and has 17 locations. Pre-COVID, he was up to 20, and then we did some cutting back. And so, from a local perspective, that's where I give a lot of attention. That's probably as close as it gets. But I'm trying to look at the national level. We brought Smashburger into New York City. And so there's 2 ways that these things happen. One, you're out there prospecting, and you get to the opportunity to have a conversation, and you talk about your resume, which, I'm doing it, so I have it. And then there's, you're at a stage now, not that I sit back on it, but, referrals come my way, and that's helpful. And you take it through the story. But one of the things that I don't say I always learned, it took some time to learn, but I think proficient in it now, is that when you're speaking to these tenants and their master plan, because they all have a master plan, and that's perfectly fine. You do just that. You just listen. You let them talk about it, and you let them go through it, and then you bring them here. So here for me is New York, right? So they're company XYZ, Panda Express. They're out of California, and they have their way, and they're national. Panda has 2,800 stores across the country. They were less than that when we started, obviously 18 years ago, but still, they were well over 1,000, and they had their way of doing business. And you listen and you try to understand that as best you possibly can. And then you politely, for lack of a better term, let them know that New York is just done a little different. And I've done this over the years. It's a very hard thing. Every national tenant that I've worked with over the years, I always tell them, I say to them, the word prototype? I say, forget it. It doesn't exist in Manhattan. It just doesn't. You got to figure it out. The 25 by 100, if we find it, great, but don't plan on it every time. And so even going back to my CVS days, to find things where there are grade changes and things like that, and it was bonkers. They just, I need my 100 by 100, 10,000 square foot corner. It's a process. It's a process to go through, but you got to walk them through it. What we've had, like with Panda over the years, is when you respectfully tell them that things are done a little bit differently here in New York, they respectfully tell you that they did $6 billion in sales and we have 2,800 stores and this is how we do it. And so, you balance that. It's a balancing act because to them, the way they are, they're a privately held company. There's no one store ever that moves the needle. Mm-hmm. And so if it doesn't work, they just go on to the next one. Now, we as brokers, we go nuts because there goes that fee, and now I got to start all over again. And it's a process. Going back a little bit in terms of my personal chronology, like when I was doing the Dwayne Reed stuff back in the day, Wall Street dictated a lot of stuff. Wall Street, for a stock to do well, it always required growth. And we went through a stretch there of several years where, if the CEO promised X stores in a quarter, you needed to get X stores. If he promised 10 stores in a quarter and you hit 9, well, their stock drops, precipitously, for a day or two, but it drops. And so you were driven by that. And I've seen in my career a lot of companies, not that I represented all of them, that were driven by the market. I don't see that. I haven't seen that anymore. Companies go public. I think of like a Kava that recently went public.
Right? They've been blowing up. My gosh.
Exactly. They're blowing up, but they're blowing up because they're doing their business well.
Sure.
They're not saying to the street, they'll say roughly we'll do 50 stores next year or some number. But there was a stretch of time through, I'll say the late 90s, maybe early aughts, where guys and the market were driven by the number of stores that were open. I mean, we were doing things like with Dwayne Reed, all legit stuff where they'd acquire a small chain when there used to be small drugstore chains around. So they'd buy them, right? So if Dwayne Reed's model was 7,000 to 10,000 square feet of store, what they would do is they go buy the mom and pop chain. That's probably about 2,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And essentially they wind up taking the prescription business and they move it into the 10,000 foot box. Maybe not day one, but that's the eventuality. That's the goal. And what would happen is they'd go buy this small chain and it'd be like, oh shit, I got a quarterly report. And so the next day you'd be out there and that 2,000 square foot store would have a Dwayne Reed banner on it. It was a Dwayne Reed store. And that's how you did it. That's, again, you were so Wall Street driven. And again, I don't see that today. And especially Panda being privately held, one at a time, no rush. Mm-hmm. We'll get it right. We know what we're doing, kind of thing. But a long-winded answer to your question. But the focus is really, truly understanding what their wants and needs are. And one of those, and that's part of the appeal to me about this business is every tenant's got different wants and needs. Mm-hmm. And it's great. You learn about businesses, behind the scenes, front of the scenes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I've noticed that too, just through interactions I've had with different tenants, is that their criteria is, although some are similar in where they want to be located, maybe, right. But even in those respects, there's even some nuance to it as well. So, regarding that piece of the puzzle, so let's say that you built really strong relationships with tenants from all over the country, and they're entering into the local market, in your case, Manhattan. So you have that initial conversation. They kind of set the expectations on what they have, and then you yourself politely set the expectation about how Manhattan operates. So through that process, kind of let us know, how do you get them from where they're at as far as their expectations, and maybe that they're just very rigid on the way that they operate, and there's no moving the needle. But through that process of getting them into a space, what's the evolution, right? And then maybe some of the hurdles and obstacles that are typical in new entrants to the market, and how you're helping them overcome those obstacles.
Sure. So firstly, in your listening of what their wants and needs are, right? You work from a demographic perspective, from a traffic perspective, a co-tenancy perspective, and then you take them to those. You take them, now we get to do it virtually to a certain degree, but eventually you literally get on the street with them. But you take them to those markets and you make them aware, first and foremost, because it's probably number one, is what the rents are. So they have a true understanding. So, I understand, Mr. Tenant, that this is your top 10 of wants and needs. Okay. And so for that, the general, average, median, pick whatever word you want, rent for that is going to be X. And if we get past that, then we can get into the other things. We can point to the ceiling heights, corner versus inline, location to the where you are in the vicinity of your most direct competitor, if you want to be there, or where do you want to be in relationship to the subway stop where the traffic generates. And so you work through all that stuff and you take them there. In some cases, if you hit that spot and they must have 10-foot ceilings or 12-foot ceilings, and this one's 9.5, well, we got to talk it through. Hey guys, you want to be in this market. If this is the number one spot, this is what's here now. What's your timing like? A Panda Express may say, you know what? We'll wait till I get my 10.5-foot ceiling or my 11-foot. Another tenant may say, no, I need it. It's part of my growth strategy. I need to get in here. Let me figure out how to work in 9.5-foot ceilings, things like that. And so you got to walk them through. You got to walk them through that. Oftentimes there's no basement space with the Manhattan store, or in some cases, not often, but basement is not directly adjacent. It's out of the store and around the corner, or it's a hatch in the sidewalk up front, but not in the store. Nuances of New York. But you start by working from all of their criteria, and you try to, take their, call it square peg, and fit it into our square hole. So it's really a focus on what their needs are. And look, sometimes it takes some breaking in. You got to break them in a little bit, and they'll see what it takes. But
yeah, and so regarding that with the negotiation, so let's say you typically you find a space that kind of fits what they're looking for, and now you make a play at the space. Like, are there some nuances to New York City that maybe aren't necessarily as common in other markets? Could you kind of highlight that? I know obviously air rights in New York City are a huge deal from an acquisition standpoint, but on the leasing side, I'm not sure on your end how that plays in. In our local market, it's not necessarily nearly as big of a deal in that case, but yeah.
Yeah. I think that what happens with the city is that there is no general rule of thumb. It's literally from one to the next to the next. One building may be a landmark building, so then you have certain restrictions as it relates to your exterior signage. Then the next building is a Class A office building, and so you may not be able to vent if we're talking about a food tenant, or if you're going to vent, you have to put in what is called a precipitator and do all of these things as a workaround, because a Class A office building with 1 million square feet above you is a lot more important than your 2,500 square foot store. Things like that. We have co-ops and condo buildings here, so those people are going to have a lot to say about the type of tenancy. And again, this is literally block by block how it changes. Yeah. So, there are areas of the city, some places like in the West Village or Soho, that are landmark districts. So a tenant essentially knows that going in, which means that the landmarks committee will have to sign off on their signage, but they won't be as restrictive as if your building itself was a landmark. So things like that. And so that just requires you spending a little bit more money on your architect.
Yeah.
So the nuance is one after the other, after the other, after the other. There's no blanket rule about this city.
Yeah. No, and that's what's fascinating, and that's why it benefits these groups to engage someone like yourself who's really understanding of how all these dynamics are at play, such that they can overcome some of these obstacles. Because if they just say, "Oh, well, this building could be the same as what I've seen in St. Louis or some of these other markets," I mean, it's not necessarily going to be the case. And you mentioned venting. That's one actually had a deal recently where we had an issue on venting because it was in an apartment complex, and we were trying to work with the architect and engineer to try to make sure that the venting fed out the top of the roof versus on the side because of the smell and everything. So it was a pain in the butt.
But like that, my problem is a lot of my roofs are 30 stories up.
Yeah, and that's not feasible for you. Yeah, this was like four stories. So obviously it was another layer of complexity. But in your case, it's not even feasible. Like it's just not.
Well, no, don't say that. Everything's feasible. Everything's feasible with money.
There you go.
If you want to spend it,
just write the check.
That's it. So and we have those things, and what happens is we've lost deals. Not necessarily. Like with certain landlords, they get draconian, right? And we go through an LOI process. We agree to terms, right? And then they draft a lease that says if I get three smell complaints in a month, we can throw you out.
Oh wow!
I'm like. I said to the broker on the other side, I said, listen to me. We smell. I'm telling you right now, we're going to smell. They put in, and obviously I'm alluding to Panda Express. I said, they put in the Rolls Royce of venting systems. I'll show it to you. They spend a fortune. Okay. But I can't have Mrs. Smith in apartment 3B complain 3 times. And you send me a note and says your lease is terminated. Ain't going to happen. And so I get that from time to time. So like when I introduce a prospective landlord or landlord rep to Panda Express about a space I'd like to present, I start off with basically 3 things. One, you got to have one. Obviously, you'll take my use. Number 1, right? 1A, do you have the utilities I need? Because I'm not coming without them, and I'm not signing up for you to go get them. I need them there. And 2, we're going to smell. We're going to smell, right? So let's all know that. And if you don't want to proceed, we're brokers. Time is money. If you don't, a fast no is better than a slow maybe all day long.
100%.
So
yeah, that's
when we move on, we stay friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And you set that expectation on the front end, which is brilliant. I mean, that's how you get deals done. It's like, hey, these are all the objections that could potentially come up because we've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. Yep. So if we overcome these 4 or 5 objections, which we've seen in the marketplace, then at least now we know it's worth pursuing the next steps. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels. You may be engaging architects. You may be working with other people, start running the clock as far as, legal fees and all other stuff. And it's just a wasting everyone's time, and everyone's going to be frustrated at the end of the day. So,
and most of the experienced brokers that I work with on the other side, they appreciate it. The young brokers, they're starting to get it, but they don't get it when they're on the landlord side. When I just say, no, it's not there, hey, let's stay friends. We'll get the next one. Oh, no, we'll get it. I say politely, Junior, it doesn't work that way. Call me when you have it, and then we'll talk.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just continue to foster that relationship long term. So you mentioned, we highlighted kind of the tenant side of things.
Sure.
You've highlighted criteria, sitting down with the tenant, getting understanding what how they operate. You kind of setting some expectation on their side before you start engaging and looking for space. And then going through that process, there's a lot of things you need to consider as you're going through the leasing process, because in New York City, you've got the co-ops, you've got office buildings that could potentially cause issues as far as venting. If you're talking about Pan Express or any other tenants you're working with, you have to really get a clear understanding of what those are, set the expectation up front with the other side so that you could eventually get the deal done at the end of the day and save everyone time and energy. So that's great. And I think that's very helpful for a lot of people who are listening. Now, on the landlord side, which I know you do some landlord rep, you rep a very large landlord in town. So, how do you set expectations on the landlord side? Because that's also a different dynamic, because, you obviously are an expert in what's going on the leasing side. And not to say landlords aren't. Landlords are very experienced investors. They understand the dynamics at play for the most part, but sometimes markets shift. So, what your expectations were maybe 2-3 years ago may be completely different than what it is today. And then obviously constantly coaching and having a conversation with a landlord about that. So kind of the question that I'm asking is regarding co-tenancy and tenant mix, which is a problem that, you had kind of talked about. So how do you, I guess, coach or not, I mean, I wouldn't say coach, but I guess
advise.
Yes, exactly. And I want to be very clear about that. I don't want to make anyone upset or anything. So advise. How do you advise landlords about tenant mix and co-tenancy and how that could potentially help them long term as far as asset value?
Well, you know what? It's interesting. It's almost the same as the tenant report, as the tenant story. You start out by saying, or speaking with them and understanding their expectations of their property, what their wants and needs are, and then you work from there, right? Getting past the fact that every landlord wants the most money possible, you work with, you say, look, this is the market. And all markets are cyclical, but I find that we're very cyclical here in New York, and we have so many sub-markets within Manhattan and things like that things do shift. And so what you do is you hear what their wants and needs are, number one. Number two, you then inform them, right? We're in a data-driven world, like beyond belief at this point. And there's access to information, and then there's the information we gather, and it's a combination of the two. You work simple stuff, market comps to the best of your ability. Then you use Placer AI for traffic things and the like. And then you speak to your market. So what I do is when I walk into any landlord conversation, under the assumption it's not a landlord I'm so familiar with, just someone they know me, whatever, we're coming in for a pitch. I have, and this goes all the way back to my first job of walking the streets, we have every street in Manhattan mapped. It is not the NACL map room. Okay. It's not the NACL map room because our business is the storefronts. So all of the retail avenues, all of the retail streets, all identify who's in where there are vacancies, things like that. And then we keep data of comps, asking rents, etc. So I lay that out for a landlord, and we dress it up artistically, for internal purposes. I can see it on a piece of paper. I go to a landlord, we'll put tenant logos in where it's appropriate, sort of standard stuff. And we walk them through the market. We walk them through their market. We tell them the rents that were achieved across the street last Tuesday or 3 years ago. And that 3 years ago's rent is not the same as last Tuesday's rent. It's much lower than the market, if that's the case. And we walk them through. Okay. And then we talk about, here in the city, we have an area of the city on Madison Avenue that we call the Gold Coast. High-end luxury jewelers and brands and things like that, right? We're not doing a Panda Express there. But if we're in that market, we're going to speak to that market. And so it's the same thing you would do it in certain centers throughout Louisville, right? You speak to the market and you do your best to educate them. Oftentimes, the conversation is not so much about the space that day, but it's about the building they're going to build there. Yeah. And what it looks like. So you're talking a little bit more future. Do I have day-to-day pitches? I had one this morning, right? Where the guy said, we're marketing this space. We talked it through. We did the whole thing. We got the assignment. And then, oh, by the way, I think my corner guy's leaving. So now we got another assignment. And so that's a little bit more right here, right now. But broadly speaking, you work through the process of keeping them as educated as you can. I think my friend Bob Knackel always likes to say, don't give them adjectives, give them facts. And so I like to think that we do a very good job of doing just that.
Definitely. No, I agree. And you've obviously have a system in place to be able to support the data aggregation, which ultimately leads to better pitches, better conversations, and ultimately better service to your clients. So, regarding the breakdown of, spaces, so referencing co-tenancy, getting an understanding of what type of, tenants could potentially occupy space. Let's say that, you're about to start working with a new landlord. They got, let's say, 5,000 feet that is downstairs. It's an inline building. There's two separate spaces. One's maybe both 2,500 square feet, or maybe we break it up, but maybe like 3,500, 1,500, just to kind of give us some perspective on space sizing. Like, how do you go about that process of saying, okay, well, what type of uses would work here? And then two, like the co-tenancy piece, can they play nice together? What's the benefit there? So what's the thought process there? Because that's another piece oftentimes that I've faced with some landlords, is that they have this idea. It's like, oh, I would love to have this here, but the viability of it actually working based on what they're asking as far as rent or whatever other dynamics there are, maybe it just isn't feasible. So maybe we have to pivot as far as what our thought process is on tenant. So I'm kind of curious about your thought process there.
Yeah, no, I take you back to the education piece. You have to educate them, right? Everybody, I want Gucci and I want $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't fit here. So let me tell you that, the type of tenants that work. Let me tell you who can coexist, and you do it that way. We have, I had this interesting conversation with a landlord. I was working on a Panda deal, and we were having this conversation about exclusivity in his property and things like that. And he made a great point, and I haven't known him a long time, but he made a great point about exclusivity. He's like, I don't own the building next door, okay? I can't stop them from putting a Chinese restaurant next door to you. I can't stop them from putting P.F. Chang's next to you. Why are you so worried about what and McDonald's was the co-tenant? My concern was what they looked like in their sublease and assignment provision. Mm-hmm. I can't stop them. I gave them a broad sublease and assignment clause because they were my first tenant. They were there for me when I needed them. So they asked for some things. So I can't protect you. And Panda was a little concerned about that because normally they get that level of protection and exclusivity. But the guy said he made a great point. He goes, Cory, look at all your Pandas around the city. You don't control the landlord next door on either side. You put P.F. Chang right there. So what's the difference? Why is everybody getting so hell-bent and crazy about this thing? And it was a great point. But within your own space, if you're controlling your own space, right, I'm not going to put in, it's unlikely I'm putting in Panda and P.F. Chang's, right? Mm-hmm. So you work within the confines of your box and the reality beyond a landlord's hopes and dreams. And then you figure it out. And you also, again, going back to Madison Avenue, Gold Coast, where are we, right? The property you referred to, it's a hard answer, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
Where are we? Mm-hmm. Right? There's a new area of town that's come alive over the last 10 years. It almost was like we have Upper East Side, Upper West Side. We have the West Village with the East Village, Harlem, all this stuff. And then from a marketing perspective, there was a whole area of town. They've been calling it for about 5 or 7 years now, called Nomad. Mm-hmm. They just created an area, and it's a hip, cool area. And so now we're going to go into Nomad. What is the mix there? Mm-hmm. Again, probably not putting Gucci. I need a cool restaurant. Mm-hmm. Mr. Landlord, that's who's coming. And so you really have to work them. And again, they're all, and you know this because you're a broker, you're out there, right? When we talk to these landlords, mostly the landlords, they're far and away the smartest person in the room, and they let you know that, right? Yeah. So you have to politely, like I said earlier, right? You have to politely educate them on the reality of things. I'm not going to get you 500 a square foot. Every comp I have here says 200. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting you 500. And by the way, and I'm being semi-facetious, but I've been in the pitches where it's 200 of value, and a guy will say to me that XYZ company tells me it's worth 350 a foot. And you know what I say to him? Hire XYZ company. And when they're through, come back to me.
Yeah, I mean that is funny because it happens to everyone where, this owner has this peg that's been set by an unrealistic expectation set by maybe someone who just wants the business. And then they try to use that as leverage and say, well, this person thinks they can get that. And it's like, well, let them waste their time because you're going to spin your wheels for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and then realize that it's an unrealistic expectation. And now you've maybe even stigmatized your property because now people have been looking at that and say, oh, they want like a crazy rent for that property. And, and then now you maybe have to reset the expectation with the marketplace. And now there's this stigma saying, oh, well, maybe we can negotiate with them to get a better rate because it's been sitting for 18 months,
And by the way, some of the best assignments I've had in people I know in the business for years will tell you the best assignment is being the second broker.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because it's everyone's in reality check mode.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. No. So regarding that, so you've kind of set the expectation on the owner side. They've
Mm-hmm.
trusted you and said, these guys know what they're doing. They built the data sets. They understand all the dynamics of what's going on in the marketplace. I want to hire them to move forward and help me find a tenant. So in that regard, I mean, how do you get from point A, where you've signed the leasing agreement, to getting whatever the top rate you can get for the market is? Is it like a strategic approach to, to your point, maybe talk about a little bit of a canvassing, because I know you do a ton of that.
Yeah.
And you also are engaged with other organizations like ICSC and everything else. So
Sure.
kind of if you could highlight some of those, that'd be helpful.
Okay, and so if you work through the spectrum, right, of hey, there's a store downstairs and it needs to be rented.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's one assignment, and so that one gets done almost literally door to door, right? That's the door to door assignment. That's my one of my young brokers, part of my team, literally knocking doors, flyer. And by the way, that's how I get my assignments sometimes, because we'll roll our sleeves up and we go get it. So we do that. That's your basic. That's your prospecting. Then there's the prospecting of, if you look at the Upper East Side, can you find some similarities with the Upper West Side? And so you have your Upper East Side property. So maybe I should go spend some time on the Upper West Side with some of those tenants that maybe need to come to the Upper East Side. So basic stuff. So you start there. Then you work through your systems. Like there's a variety of software packages that allow for you to go to the tenants and find lists of tenants. Certainly ChatGPT, right? Things like that. That's the world we live in. And you hit every one of them. And I would not be doing my landlord a service if I didn't make sure that the entire brokerage community was very much aware of the opportunity. And so we do that. We do a full marketing package. People do fast delete clicks on email flyers these days, but you have to have it out there. And so you do that. It's website, it's social media. We make sure I'm not a Kardashian. I don't have millions of followers, but there's enough. We get it out there. We make sure the community is aware of it. So those are all of some of the basics that we do to rent the space. And quite frankly, as technologically advanced as we get in this world, and it's happening on a daily basis, the core of this business is pounding the pavement and knocking on the doors. And you just start there. If you get the next level property, the development we were alluding to earlier, right? That's a certain type of tenant. And so now you start reaching out to your nationals and you make them aware of it, because the nationals, they know how to think 12, 18, 24 months out. Mom and pop, they don't do that. So you start projecting out to them, and we use our reach, we use our contacts. I've made so many great friends and referral partners via social media that I just call, someone tells me, boom, I just call somebody down in Florida. We start talking about it. I find out about them, a new tenant. Hey, you know them? And you use that as a contact just to add to your list. And you just do it. But it's a constant, we're different than the investment sales guys, right? They're calling, hey, do you want to sell? Hey, do you want to sell? Hey, do you want to sell? Right? Trying to get a conversation. I get that. Kyle Matthews, Bob Mackel, I get that. But this, you've done retail leasing. We're so much more nuanced than that. Mm-hmm. And our process is so much longer than that. I don't knock them. That's how that business gets done. Ours just doesn't, right? Ours is, we like our small victories. One, the guy took your call, right? Small victory. Send me your information, right? Victory. Next, can you send me send me all the package of demographics? Victory. Hey, I'm coming to town, right? That's like that early home run. It's not a deal, but it's an early home run. And now you're into it with this guy, but he likes it. Then he comes in and he likes it. Now I've already just described for you 45 to 60 days, right? He comes into town, he looks at it. It was great. Let's get an offer in. So now you started. Now Panda, for example, and most national chains do this. I'm sure you see this. Panda's LOI is 14 pages long.
Yeah.
I got in New York City, man, we for years, my whole career, They don't care what you say. They don't care what cycle we're in. All these landlords says, it's my fucking world. You're living in it. Like, what is this 14-page piece of shit? Kind of thing. And am I allowed to curse on this?
Yeah, you can, of course. Yeah.
I'm kidding. And so you got to go through that. You got to walk them through. And early on with Panda, I said, guys, we need to tweak this. Okay. I know it's a template, but we need to set up a New York City template, because guys get pissed off when they have to read the parking lot clause. Mm-hmm. Right? Not here. There's no pylons and parking lots, and can't get out of here. So we tweaked it and we created what we believe is at least a Panda New York City template. It's still 14 pages long, but a lot of time. So you got to do all that stuff. So you just work the process, but and then when you finally land the guy and he back and forth on an LOI, he says, great, let me get my operations team in, let me get my construction team in. Yeah. Right. So now you and I, based on our hypothetical, we're into this for 4 months. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And then you first, if you agree to terms, then you start a lease negotiation. And
sometimes you got committee, like real estate committee and stuff like that. So it's it can be it's funny because I like people talk about leasing. Like, oh, that seems like a quick turnaround. And I'm like, no, like leasing takes a lot longer, especially when you start getting into these, to your point, like a lot more sophisticated type of transactions. Sure. It's like, no, it takes a while.
Guys, when my guys canvas, and prospect for potential Panda sites, and I make sure that they call on existing properties with existing tenancy. And I say, and the landlord says, no, I have nothing available. I said, well, look, our client can work, 18 months out. Is it coming available? Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, when the 1 or 2 times we've sort of struck gold with that conversation, it's been perfect because, Panda is very, very, I'll say efficient, synonymous with slow. and so it takes a lot of freaking time. Like I just looked at one of their leases are coming up, and it's December 1, 26. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we should move that store, right? December 1, 26. I said, timing's perfect. I can go get started trying to figure out the next one. And so I can lead into that. And so where I hopefully get to a point where I can open and close on the same day. Sure. Most people can't think that far in advance. And that's the good and the bad and the fun and the learning of working with nationals. Obviously, the end goal is the reward, but it takes a lot of time. Most of my Panda deals, 9 to 12 months. Yeah. And by the way, that's with a 25 by 100 box sitting there. I'm not talking about ground up. I'm talking about a straight up lease. Mm-hmm. Because you spend 3 weeks talking about the fucking smell.
Yeah.
And how do we write it? So things like that, that's part of the process.
Absolutely. So no, I appreciate the insight you share, because this is the type of stuff that people just don't really talk about, and it is a prevalent. It's prevalent thing that happens in particular in food and beverage when you're interacting with tenants of all different areas of the country. So very insightful. So one thing I was going to ask, I just have 2 more questions, and I was going to open up to Q&A. So if you guys are listening to this on LinkedIn, Facebook, any of the other social platforms, feel free to type away in the chat box. We'll try to get to your questions pretty quickly. But to start, are there any industry trends right now that you're kind of watching that maybe you feel is worth sharing, whether that's on the actual retail leasing side? Technology's become a big piece of this. I know we referenced some of the stuff that you guys are doing as far as tools. So I don't know if there's anything in particular you'd like to share in general regarding industry trends.
Yeah, I don't think I have any deep, dark secrets other than to continue to see F&B, continuing to grow. They're in a I would say a modest pause, sort of. Let's see what happens with some of this tariff stuff. Not so much, and it's not so much, purely from the food perspective. It's about the costs of their equipment that they have to get from around the world, and getting that stuff in, and what that's going to cost, and how that's going to play through. But I think they're going to continue to go and grow. Whether we talked about earlier, like a Cava, Panda, Chipotle, these guys are all still doing things. They're reinventing it themselves to a certain degree. I should say reinventing it. They're tweaking, right? To your point on technology, I think I remember reading, maybe it was a year or so ago, California was the first state to go to like $20 an hour minimum wage, and so Chipotle, went out and invested in a robotic avocado chopper, smasher, or whatever you want to call it. So that eliminated the employees, and they made the investment on technology. So you have that, and then you have there's a chain, and I don't know if they've made it out your way or not. Now a startup called Wonder.
Okay. I haven't heard of them.
Okay, they're backed by Mark Laurie, who created Jet.com and Walmart.com. He's a big entrepreneur, private equity guy, rolling out stores that are basically what I call front-facing ghost kitchens. Remember that whole concept of ghost kitchen? So it was basically going to be a door, but everything was done back there. You can go pick up your stuff. So now they have it right in front. You can walk into a literal store, and they have a menu of 15 or so different cuisines that they perform in one kitchen. And
wow.
I just saw he had another round of raise. I think they got it as almost like a $700 million valuation, rolling out stores. And they're using technology, everything mobile, to keep their stuff going. And so I think that there's a confluence of that constantly, whether it's at its core for us, which is data, or it's these businesses and how they operate. So I see that continuing.
Definitely. No, I mean, I appreciate the feedback there, because to your point,
Sure.
I mean, and there's so many moving pieces. I mean, obviously on the industry side, you've got new tenants that are coming available constantly. You've got, shifting dynamics as far as expansion of food and beverage in particular. I know we've talked about quite a bit is, what's the tariff situation looking like for equipment? How is that going to affect, our growth plan going forward? And then obviously on the technology side, we referenced Placer AI's phenomenal tool, other tools, plus, incorporating that into your marketing and everything else is a very beneficial. So, obviously appreciate that. So last question before we open up to Q&A. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the feedback from the guys or people who are watching this podcast. What advice would you give to kind of agents earlier in their career? Because we have a good amount of, and I think it's just a function of the fact that podcast listeners tend to skew a little bit more earlier. So, you're talking the average age of, when I looked at the stats for the podcast, are anywhere between, call it early to mid 20s all the way up to like late 30s. So that's kind of I would say 60% of the listenership is in that range. So somewhat earlier in their career, right? They're kind of establishing themselves in the marketplace, whatever marketplace that may be. What type of advice do you typically give to the people that you work with or the people you're mentoring to make sure that they can grow within their career? And if it's the retail leasing side, what advice would you give?
So I always talk about a handful of things: patience, discipline, organization. Okay. Understand, if you're going to step into this business, number one, you should go take an intern. If you're stepping in cold, go get an internship somewhere, be around it, feel it. And if you truly believe in it, great, stick with it. But understand that it is a 3-year process. Okay. Before it really even starts, even though you got to put in those 3 years, you're going to make essentially no money for the first 18 to 24 months. And then when it kicks in, it's a little something, nothing dramatic, but there's always pure dumb luck that you can't take away from that, but you can't bank on it. But there's always that opportunity, because that's why people get into sales businesses at all, right? Because there's no ceiling. But understand that it's a grind, and it's a process, and it's time in. You got to put the time in. Listen, learn, take notes, prospect in New York City, walk, talk, go to things, be at events, absorb anything and everything, and start to put yourself in a position where you can create opportunity. But it's a long grind, but it is fruitful. It takes time. It's really a 3-year thing before you're truly in the game. And then you get to the 5 and the 10 years of your life and your career. And you can find there are just so many things that come from it. People often ask me about an exit strategy, because I'm a small independent company, and I've spoken to the big companies, and I really say to people, I never thought about an exit strategy. And they first of all, they look at me like I'm crazy, right? Because everybody, what's your exit? What's your exit? What's your exit? I say, the way I'm set up, and not everybody is, and I get that, is that I have an opportunity strategy. And so what does that mean? I said, well, where I'm sitting, I have the opportunity to learn about new businesses, do a variety of leasings, landlord rep, tenant rep, but I also have the opportunity to possibly invest in some of these new businesses. Mm-hmm. I also have the opportunity, oftentimes, owners or buyers of property who want my tenant often give me the opportunity to invest in the property. And so I'm around that conversation. And again, I get away with it, not in a bad way, but I get away with it because it's me, it's a small company. I understand why they can't do it at some of the larger firms, but I'm around it. Way off topic, side hustle. I own single family homes. Mm-hmm. And that came about because of where I'm sitting. Things like that. Somebody else runs it for me, but I'm a 50-50 partner in it. And so it's because I'm here. So that's why I say I have an opportunity strategy. And I think that if you look to get into this business, and quite frankly, you could be in a big firm or a small firm, you'll hear so many different things. And again, it's a great part of it. Van Express, Lenwich, Smashburger, Gucci, whatever. You learn so much about businesses and operating these businesses because most people are happy to share with you. And I think it provides, again, great opportunity. But key, patience.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal advice. And I often share, I'm 6 years in right now. And I think my first year I made 13 grand. So, and then my subsequent years was like, I think 40 and then 60. And then I tripled it and then started to get more into the swing of things. But that took 3 to 4 years of just kind of, roughing it out and making it happen. And over time, now you kind of get into more of a swing of things. And the good thing about this business, which one of the things I love, is that you can kind of define what you want, right? If you want to get out there and build the empire, you can do that. If you want to be able to kind of build something that's sustainable, and then you can go off and do not necessarily go off and do other things, because you got to be able to have the ball on the eye on the ball, but there's flexibility to do the investments that you had talked about. You have the deal flow, you have the understanding of what's going on around you, and then opportunities tend to present themselves to those individuals who are ready to capitalize. So
exactly.
Some great advice. Well, I'm going to go ahead and allow them, the audience, to type away in the chat box. So I'll give you a few minutes to be able to do that. But in the meantime, one of the questions I like to ask at the end is there anything in particular that you wish that I would have asked you in this time that we've spoken together that maybe I didn't and you wanted to share?
Not really. You hit, and this is not a knock. You hit some of the basics. Where did it start? How did it start?
Yeah.
I've heard, what would you tell your 25-year-old self and things like that. And I get that from time to time. I'm almost sort of glad you didn't ask. I think, because I think some of that is obvious kind of stuff, but.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I think you hit it. You hit it right across the board in terms of landlord and tenant and things like that. I don't think we missed.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. No. I appreciate that, and I'm hopeful that even if we're going to allow people to maybe another minute to kind of type away if they have any questions. But the good thing about this medium, which is what I love, is that this is recorded and we push it out on all the different platforms. And you'll be surprised. People will reach out, I'm sure, and may have questions or may, who knows what comes of it. But
I look forward to it because, quite frankly, and I know we didn't really talk about it, but when COVID happened and the world stopped, literally, right? Mm-hmm. Everything stopped for everybody. Mm-hmm. We were all sort of sitting around and we're like, sort of what the fuck we do, and that was our, meaning Zelnik and Company, and me being front facing, our launch of our inroads to social media. Mm-hmm. I have a 23-year-old daughter, will be 23 in a couple of weeks, and I know when I post something really good, she responds by saying, "Dad, that was cringe." And so if I make her cringe, I know I put up a good piece. And so we started utilizing this from a business perspective. Have some fun with it. I've trained for the marathon, and I've done some of that shit. I don't usually post me doing push-ups, but you try to utilize it in the best way possible, and you try to personalize it with your business. Mm-hmm. So that way you really take away from the traditional cold call, mm-hmm. right? Because most people today you're talking with, that you're going to meet down the road, I'll meet you next Tuesday. I know I've Googled them and I've LinkedIn them and I've Instagrammed them. So I'm sure they're doing it about me.
Mm-hmm.
So if they see that I'm out there and I'm a runner, or everyone knows I'm a insane Nick fan and things like that, you're walking into the room and we've already started.
And that is one of the most powerful things about these platforms. Yeah. And that's what I tell people is that, even if you think it's, because a lot of people always have the objection saying, well, it's kind of awkward and I don't want to put myself out there and whatever else. And I get it. I mean, it's definitely an awkward experience when you first get started. But at the end of the day, to your point, even if no one watches or very limited amount of people watch, there's a few things that you benefit from. Number one, you become a much more effective communicator. You build the network that you ultimately can build through just putting yourself out there. And then your prospects, the people that you're ultimately trying to get in touch with, let's say you give them a call, you leave a voicemail, and then they look you up. They see that you do all this stuff and they watch a few of your videos. Now the next conversation is completely different than it was.
You've essentially given them your full bio. They know it already. You almost
they feel like they know you. I mean, and I've had that happen plenty of times where people are like, oh, I've seen a couple of your videos. I feel like I already know you. And I don't even know you, right? But it is what it is, It's just.
And that was and like when we have this real estate gala here. Strip Mall guy has this real estate gala here in New York City.
Yeah,
300 people, and I think that maybe 250 or 260 were not from New York City, and there are a group of people that are all social media related. And you go through you're like, you hug it out, and it's the first moment you've ever met them in real life. And so that's what this whole thing is all about. It's fun. I think it's fun.
Definitely. Well, Cory, it looks like we've answered all the questions. So first off, just thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. We know you're a busy person, and we do appreciate you carving out an hour of your time to be able to speak with us. Now, if people want to learn more about you, wanted to get in touch, what's the best way to do that?
Okay. Some of the handful of easy stuff, right? I'm on Instagram. CoryZelnik, just my name. It's my same handle for X. Look me up on LinkedIn, just the same. And if you want to go through the company, it's Zelnik and Company. You can get me in any of those fashions, and I'd be reluctant. I shouldn't be reluctant to say, let's not forget the old 212-223-2200. If someone wants to go crazy and dial me up.
That's awesome. Well, we'll include all those in the show notes too. So if you guys are watching this on YouTube, feel free to go to the description. If you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcast, it'll be in the description as well. So thanks again, Cory. We really appreciate your time. I gain a lot of value from this, and I know that there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this as well that are going to gain value from it. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience. And if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. We've gotten a lot of reach as a result of that, so please continue to do so because it really does help the podcast. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you so much.